we're up here arguing about who's going to start first. This is not exactly a well-organized bunch, but
it will be a fiery bunch.
Yeah, we'll have lots to say. So it's been decided that I'm going to start. I'm Kate Walsh. I'm with the National Council on Teacher Quality here in D.C. Don't hold that against me. And what I'd like to do is sort of set the stage for what we're talking about this morning, which is teacher quality, which is sort of morphed into a new expression called human capital, given the millions and millions that Gates has put into the human capital problem. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining why teacher quality is a problem in schools, but I think you probably have all heard that lesson before. Just suffice it to say, we're not doing enough to attract, prepare, and retain teachers. So my organization looks at the three institutions that have an impact on teacher quality. The first being education schools. We actually rate education schools on a number of factors. We've done reading and math. We're now doing student teaching. We also look at teachers' unions and, by association, school districts. We have a database of contracts that we examine, sort of, we try to parse apart what is in those contracts. And so we can begin to learn more about something that has largely remained a mystery for years, and that is the intricacies of teacher union contracts and school districts. And then the last area that we focus on are states. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about a little bit this morning. And if there's one message I'd like you to take away with you is that states are everything when it comes to teacher quality. The notion that states have a limited role is not accurate in the least. In fact, I would argue that states are much more responsible for the problem of teacher quality than unions or ed schools or anybody else you can come up with. They play an absolutely outsized role. Their regulations and laws are in every nook and cranny of the teaching profession. So, and that's true even in local control states. I don't know how many of you are from states which like to call themselves local control. If Colorado is here, that's certainly the case. But even in local control states, you'll see that states have taken a very significant role when it comes to teacher quality. So our organization examines what each state does in this thing called the annual yearbook. And I think I have copies of selected copies of certain states. It's a 52-volume report, and I've put some in the back. So check and see if your state is back there, and you can go ahead and grab a copy. But I'm going to just quickly go through one area in which states play a role that people don't fully appreciate, and that's teacher dismissal. And it seems sort of timely as to, I don't know how many of you have been following the news, and maybe here in D.C. with Michelle Rhee, these layoffs. And if you understand dismissal, you understand why there's a lot of contention about a superintendent using layoffs as a way to get rid of bad teachers, because it's effectively impossible it's nearly impossible to dismiss a teacher for being ineffective in the classroom. And it's state's fault that that's the case. If you look at state laws on dismissal, what they do is merge poor performance with dereliction of duty. Why does that matter? If you have a list of things that, if you have a list of factors that are cause for dismissal, why does it matter if being ineffective is lumped with other things? Because it's lumped generally with a decision to take away a license. So if you've committed a crime, you get your teacher license taken away from you. If you're ineffective, you shouldn't have your license taken away from you, but the same process ends up applying, the same hoops. I'm sure Joel can attest to this better than I can about the cost of taking a teacher through the dismissal process and the numerous appeals and the length of time that is required by a district to go and do that. So if you look through state law, first of all, there's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of euphemisms for what it means to be a bad teacher. I just wrote a few of these down: incompetency, inefficiency, inability, inadequacy, incapacity. And you tried to defend that before an administrative law judge. It's rarely decided ultimately by an educator. It's decided by a court of law. So that's another problem that we could get into. But let's look at California. So I'm going to read you the dismissal law in California. Specifically, the process for dismissal is the same regardless of the grounds for cancellation, which include immoral or unprofessional conduct, commission, aiding, or advocating the commission of acts of criminal syndicalism, dishonesty, unsatisfactory performance, okay, that's what we're looking for, evident unfit for service, physical or mental condition unfitting him or her to instruct or associate with children, persistent violation of or refusal to obey the school laws, conviction of a felony, knowing membership in the Communist Party, and alcoholism or other drug abuse that makes the employee unfit. That's assuming, I guess, that you could abuse drugs but still be found to be fit by a lawyer. In another state, we looked at the list of factors included active tuberculosis. So anyway, in California, it's basically if you're a member of the mob or a communist or just a bad teacher, you might get fired. So do dismissal policies really matter? They do. And I'm not saying, if you're looking at a policy of developing a good workforce that's based on dismissal, you've pursued the wrong strategy. In no profession do we build the workforce by firing people. But the notion that you can't fire someone, that they can't do a bad enough job that you can say you're dismissed and you get one hearing, and if you lose the appeal, you're done. The fact that that does not happen has huge ripple effect in the profession. That 10 or 15% of teachers who are at the bottom, that's not just who these dismissal laws target, because it lowers the standard of performance for all teachers. Really good teachers look and know that that bad teacher next to them can stay as long as he or she wants, and nobody's going to do anything about it because it's too much trouble and it costs too much money. So that's just one area that state law gets into, but you could also do the same spiel for scope of bargaining. That's decided by states. It's not decided by the districts. Tenure laws, the school day, how much leave teachers get, the benefits, class size, approval of programs, that's ed school programs, has an enormous impact. So it's very important that we understand the source of the policy decisions that have such a serious and significant impact on teacher quality. Thank you.
Do you want me to jump in and I'll do a little on the... I just wanted to add on, this is... I'll add on a little bit to what Kate said. I'm Audiella Rosman from the New Teacher Project. We're a nonprofit organization entirely focused on the issues of getting great teachers in classrooms and keeping them there, whether that means establishing new pipelines to the classroom, certifying teachers, or identifying barriers that prevent that from happening. And we actually did a lot of looking recently at this issue that Kate raised about dismissal. We put out a report that studied 12 different districts in 4 different states and surveyed 16,000 teachers. And our premise was to go in and understand, why is it that no teachers get dismissed? Because we know there's poor performance there, we know people know about it. Why is it that so very few teachers get dismissed, which is a fact that we all live with? And what we found is that that was just one piece of a much, much larger problem. What we found, and what we think is the fundamental flaw of our school system, is that we treat teachers like widgets. We treat them like they are all interchangeable, like any teacher can fill any spot and that will be just fine. And if you think about what Michelle told you about this morning, that teachers matter more than anything else, that a teacher makes a life-changing difference in the life of a student, we know that not only are teachers very, very different, but they're the most important thing. And so our system should be set up to recognize those differences and to be able to reward those that are fabulous and identify those that are not fabulous and say, you don't have the privilege of teaching these kids. So we're actually starting many, many steps back from an enormous problem, which is, let's not start saying, how can we reward good teachers? How can we dismiss poor teachers? Let's start by saying, how can we even identify those folks in the first place? Because that is not happening now at all. And I'll just give you some example of some of the data that we came across, which was astonishingly consistent to us. So we looked at districts' evaluation systems, and some districts have multiple evaluation ratings, and some of them have a binary satisfactory, unsatisfactory. In the districts that have the multiple ratings, which is a step up from just a yes, no, we found that all teachers are pretty much rated as good or great. So for example, in Chicago, you can be a superior, you can be an excellent. Do not ask me what the difference between superior and excellent is. You can be satisfactory, you can be unsatisfactory. 93% of the teachers in Chicago, you'll be astonished to know, are superior or excellent. And 6% are in the basic category, and 0.4% are unsatisfactory. So we have schools that are failing, we have kids that are failing, but our teachers, they are all great. And if you actually look at the distribution of evaluations by the schools that have been doing worse and worse every year, those schools have what looks to be the very best teachers. And this is consistent across district. When we looked in districts that either gave a satisfactory or unsatisfactory rating, what we find is less than 1%, like 0.5% of folks are getting an unsatisfactory rating. And then we looked across districts to say how many teachers are actually getting dismissed for poor performance. In half of our districts that we studied, not a single dismissal for poor performance over the past 5 years. Chicago was our rock star district that dismissed 9 people over the past 3 years for poor performance. So clearly, we're never going to be able to get there unless we can establish systems that really differentiate teachers. And that can happen at the state level by ensuring that the state ed code is actually focused on effectiveness of teacher, and that not only are you mandating that teacher effectiveness be identified, and you can tell if it is, because if you look at your evaluation systems and everybody is great, you can tell that something is not working well there. So not only is it about mandating that everybody be identified and be given concrete feedback, but it's also about ensuring that then decisions are driven off of that. So every decision along the continuum should be driven off of that, whether it be compensation, whether it be tenure, whether it be dismissal. That should be based on the quality of the teacher first and foremost. And we see that this issue of the widget effect permeates everything. It's not just about the fact that you don't see teachers getting dismissed, it's that you don't see great teachers being kept in classrooms because they don't know who they are and they're not rewarded. We also see that teachers don't get the professional development they need because they don't get the feedback they need. So when we surveyed our 16,000 teachers, 3 out of 4 of them told us they did not get specific feedback in their performance evaluations about their performance. How can we look at our professional development and think that we're doing a good job with professional development when we're not even telling these teachers where they need to improve, never mind aligning professional development to that? So I would say first and foremost is creating that system that says that we know that teachers are different. So let's look at those differences, let's identify them, and then let's make all of our decisions based off of them, because that's what our kids need.
Your turn.
Good morning. Paul Pastorek from the great state of Louisiana, but oddly enough, one of the lowest achieving states in the country, and oddly enough, being asked to come and present before you. Imagine that. So let's take a look at just a little picture of Louisiana. You have about 680,000 children, about 100,000 adults, 60,000 of which are teachers. And we perform on our NAEP test 50th in the country in English Language Arts 4th grade. But we're pretty high in 8th grade math. We're 43rd in the country. We're actually very proud of that. So we have an average school in the state of Louisiana when evaluating academic achievement that has 44% of its children below grade level. The average school in the state of Louisiana. About 65% of the kids in our system are poor. We're either the first or second highest state in the country in terms of percentage of poor children. So when we look at these statistics, we are given some kind of idea about where the problem may lay. And when we take a look at it, we realize that the quality of our teachers in Louisiana is such that they're generally unprepared to deal with the huge magnitude of poor children who attend our schools. So if we look at, for example, the number of schools, 1,300, 900 are Title I schools in Louisiana. 900. Now, have our colleges and universities, which provide most of the teachers for us in Louisiana, and those outside of Louisiana, really been providing us teachers who can teach those poor children? And I would argue that they have not. And I would argue that they really don't know how very well to do that. And until we understand how to teach our teachers how to teach poor children very well, we're not really going to be successful in Louisiana. Now, there's, I think, a whole lot of great ideas floating around out there. There are ideas to really study as the widget effect studies. There are ideas that people are experimenting with all over the country. But I'm going to talk to you, we have a lot of very interesting ideas that we're using in Louisiana, but I'm going to talk to you about one interesting idea that we've been able to get up off the ground and actually implement for a couple of years now. So there's two ways to look at this. There's what is the professional development needed for those in the classroom, those 60,000 who are out there working right now, and how can we change that equation? That's a very big question, and that's a question that mostly is being discussed here today. But I want to talk about those who are coming out of the colleges of education, the universities, and I also want to talk about alternative certification programs, because that's where our focus has been over the last 10 years in Louisiana. So what we have done is we've brought higher ed together with K-12, and we've basically said two things. We have to teach our teachers differently in our colleges and universities, and we have to provide for alternative certification mechanisms to create a more competitive environment. Our fundamental belief is that if we have a more competitive environment for the providing of new teachers, that competitive environment will necessarily cause people to figure out how to teach teachers to teach poor children well. Now, you've got to have some kind of measuring system in order to be able to do this, and that's what we did after we developed our alternative certification programs, and TNTP is one of those alternative certification programs in Louisiana that has really been a blessing to us. We then moved into the whole arena of measuring the effect of the teachers who are coming into our school system in the first and second year. And so what we decided we would do is we would tell all of our providers, both alternative certification, colleges and universities, we intend to measure the effect in the first and second year by using our tests which measure academic achievement in our classrooms. So we have a statewide battery of tests as required by No Child Left Behind from the 3rd through the 9th grade, and our graduate exit exams as well. So 4 subject areas. So we take that data and we look at the new teachers that are coming out of the colleges, universities, and alt-cert programs and measure solely the effect on academic achievement as demonstrated in our state testing protocol. Now, we could measure other things too, right? We could measure whatever their degrees may be, master degree, whether the national board certified coming out of school. We could measure a lot of other things, but we've decided that that's all we're going to measure, and we're going to report to the communities at large, including those providers, what the effects of those teachers are. Now, we spent about 3 years developing a system that would measure in a comparable way, in an appropriate way, and in a sophisticated way, and ultimately in a reliable way, so that we could know that the results we were getting were truly comparable. So here's how the measuring system works. We take a brand new teacher and we look at the population of kids that he or she is teaching, and we measure the population of kids, the same demographic population of kids that other teachers are teaching. For example, other first-year teachers are teaching, or other veteran teachers are teaching. So we're going to compare apples to apples what the effects are given by this first-year teacher and what the effects are, let's just say, for a veteran teacher. And when we compare and adjust for these demographics, we know whether or not you're able to do something on par with what other teachers are doing. Now, some could argue that you wouldn't adjust for those effects. You would just look to see what the effects are for any group of kids, and you would measure them against teachers with any other group of kids. But that's a decision that we made. We would compare demographic to demographic, apple to apple, teacher to teacher in this process. And so for the last 3 years, we've been publishing these results, and it's actually become quite interesting. So what's ended up being proven in these first few years, in the early years, is that alternative certification programs generally produce teachers who in their first year do better than their peers who are first-year teachers. But then we have some alternative certification programs that are producing teachers in their first year whose effects are better than veteran teachers in the classroom. Now you might say, well, gee, Paul, either those kids who are coming out and our first-year teachers are brilliant or your teachers in the classroom are not. And I might say, yes. But at the end of the day, we know that the teachers who are coming out are doing dramatically better. And it's almost exclusively for alternate certification programs. And what's interesting is then the colleges and universities began to develop their own alternative certification programs. And in fact, they started mirroring the programs of the alternate certification providers for their mainline, mainstream type of education and university preparation. So today, after 3 years of research, one of those colleges that was reputed to be one of the best teaching preparation colleges in our state will shortly announce that they will close their standard teaching preparation program because it competes so poorly against others in the state. And one of our other colleges in the state has now been recognized as, through its alternative certification program, as producing teachers on par with veteran teachers, in fact, exceeding veteran teachers. So that college and university is now the best college and university. But I will tell you, the best program that we've had in the state of Louisiana consistently for 3 years has been the New Teacher Project. They have produced consistently teachers which, on average, are better than the veteran teachers in the state of Louisiana. So by looking at these effects and simply looking at the academic achievement data, we've been able to drive change in the colleges of education, drive changes in the universities, put into effect a greater respect for the alternative certification programs that we have. Now, this will take us a long time to affect 60,000 teachers in Louisiana, but I think we're on a path that, from that perspective, we've begun to get it right. And I'm really proud of this because Arnie Duncan spoke to a National Governors Association meeting not too long ago and said that this is the gold standard in teacher assessment programs for first and second year teachers. So we're very proud of that. We think it's worthy of consideration. Now we have to work on that professional development piece inside the classroom. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Give him a round of applause. You should see the work he's doing in New Orleans in particular. It really is inspirational, Paul, and we thank you for it. And let me just say, two of the most important organizations are here at this panel today in terms of those of us who care deeply about the issue of teacher effectiveness, teacher quality. The work that Kate and Ariella are doing is really at the forefront, and if you don't have their websites on your computer screens, you're making a big mistake. I want to talk about the elephant in the room. It makes everybody uncomfortable, but I think if we're going to talk about the issues we're talking about, we're going to talk about money, pure and simple, and how we spend it. One of the wonderful things about education, everybody is for more money, right? Everybody thinks we ought to get more. All the people in this room say we're not getting enough, we're getting cut. And there's very little serious discussion about how you spend your money. And one of the things that always strikes me is you can look at school districts in America that have vastly more per pupil expenditure held constant for local conditions and so forth, and getting much worse results than other school districts with much less money. And one of the reasons is because we don't like to talk about return on investment. If you don't talk about return on investment, you won't make intelligent investments, and we'll continue to go down the path we're on. And nowhere is this more misguided than at the intersection of what we're talking about here today. For all of you who are in this business that I'm in, running a school district, probably the most important issue you all focus on, and everybody in the panel talk about, is teacher effectiveness, teacher quality, intelligent human resource policies, and probably the largest expenditure in your budget is teacher compensation, right? If you look at your overall budget and you add in what you pay your teachers plus the compensation, benefit package, pensions, and all of that, that is a big piece. And yet you go to all conferences, everything, very little discussion about how you're doing it. And I guarantee you, if you look at it from first principles, in no other industry would you do it this way. It makes no sense. The purpose of compensation is to attract, retain, support, and develop all-star teachers. That's what it's all about. That's why we pay people, not for showing up, not for length of service or anything else. Yeah, let's think about the average pay system in any school district in America today, certainly in large urban cities that I'm familiar with. All right, so we basically have a pay scale. The driving differentiator of is length of service, right? The more years you're there, you get paid. Second differentiator of not nearly as big a consequence is if you take some additional credits. Now, every study we have seen shows that those two differentiators do not have a return on the thing we're looking for, which is an increasingly effective teaching force. In other words, we're spending our money that way. And yet, nobody's here to argue, well, if you really want to maximize the quality or effectiveness of your teaching force, you would spend it that way. Second thing we do is we pay vast sums for pension benefits. So as you get longer in the system and you get increasingly length of service payments, they get rolled up into a pension. Now, we don't talk about it. People say teachers are underpaid, and I do think effective teachers are underpaid. But they don't take into account the entire benefit package. You go to any place else in the world, IBM, you go to Pay Emilson's school system, they of course take into account the entire compensation package in looking at how we pay people. So as a result of what we're doing, what I said yesterday is we backload this thing, and think about it this way. If I give a 5% across the board pay hike, right? Teachers are in the system longest, many of whom almost inevitably are going to stay in the system because they want to get the pension, and you can't get it until you reach a certain point. So if I give a 5% across the board pay hike, most of that money goes to senior teachers who are staying in the system, regardless of, because the real reward for them is the pension. And second of all, it not only goes to them, but typically since pensions are based on your last year or your last 3 years, it gets rolled up. So even as I'm paying them more, I'm also have to increase the payments I'm paying for a pension system. So much, when you really think about it, what do I want to do? I want to pay young people, attract them to the system, front load, so that people in their first 3, 5, 7 years, Teach for America people, teaching fellow programs and other things, who are really doing a great job, that those people are attracted and stay. You know how many good people say to me candidly, look, I can make $50,000 after 3 years teaching in New York. I can't survive on that. I'd love to stay. And if I could make $70,000, it'd be an entirely different discussion. So that's the basic structure. And we don't really differentiate it much. So, for example, math teachers and physical education teachers get paid the same, and again, the same increments as they stay longer in the system. No rational system would do it, and it's not a knock on phys ed teachers. They're enormously valuable to me. It's just that I can't get enough math teachers at the price that I'm paying, whereas I can get physical education teachers at the price that I'm paying, and therefore I need to differentiate. Any university that paid all its teachers the same, math teachers, science teachers, English teachers, they go out of business. They couldn't work that way. So we don't think about that. And of course, we don't talk about pay for performance. And most organizations I know pay for performance. So what we have is a system that fundamentally is in lockstep, backloaded, enormous pension obligations that we're building up that takes money out of the current compensation package. Michael Bennett, who's currently a senator from Colorado, used to be the Denver school chief, he did a study in Colorado. They found that their 30-year teacher cost them almost 3.5 times what their 5-year teacher cost them. And that's for all of them. It's not differentiated. And I guarantee you, if you go around the United States and think about the way people devise compensation systems, nobody would devise a system like that. What we need to think about is a rational system that enables portability in pension so that, for example, when people want to move to another district, they don't feel any deterrent to moving. We need a system in which the dollars are used on the front end effectively to attract high-quality people. We need to do what Michelle was talking about today. We need to pay people who are getting great results. We need to pay differently for people who are going into different communities, and we need to pay differently for people in different subject areas. And we've got to stop thinking that the base that currently exists is the only base we can build on. Because if we do that, no matter what we think, money is not infinite, and therefore the base will eat up all the money, and there'll be little bells and whistles that are added on, all of which are good, like the Denver system for pay for performance, but which aren't the heart of the compensation system. And as long as we're tinkering, again, these are good in a world in which 5-10 years ago there was very little tinkering. As long as we're tinkering, we're not going to get the human resource problem we want. And again, everything at this conference, every place I go, everybody tells me about teacher quality. And look, I think it's important as anybody else to have rational policies for terminating people, et cetera, et cetera. Those of you who haven't read The Rubber Room, you don't know what I go through in New York City. But the elephant in the room is we spend billions of dollars in a way, by anybody's view, is not designed to maximize the result that I am seeking to achieve, which is the most high-quality workforce in the entire country teaching in New York City. And if you don't have discretion over that lever, you're unlikely to be able to achieve the goals you want to achieve. We've made several big changes, but again, to me, these are the earliest innings of what a rational compensation system would look like. Number one, we now differentiate for what we call lead teachers in math, science, special ed. They go as a team of 2, $10,000 extra. This has had an impact. Second of all, I use for math, science, special ed teachers where I'm short, recruitment. You come, commit to me for 3 years, and I think you're qualified, go to a high-poverty school, I'll give you an additional $15,000 for those 3 years. Every year we get 100 or so teachers from that. And third, probably the most exciting thing we've done is in 200 high-poverty schools, we have a pay-for-performance plan. It's school-based. If the school meets certain targets based on student achievement, based on year-to-year test scores, that school gets $3,000 per teacher. And the thing I particularly like about it is it doesn't automatically go $3,000 to each teacher. What happens is that the 2 teachers and 2 administrators form a compensation committee, and they decide that Kate Walsh's contribution was worth $5,000 and Klein's was worth $2,000. Now, in the beginning, there's obvious inertia that draws toward each gets the same, but over time, we will see differentiation. And what I would propose in any school district in America that has a defined benefit pension plan, create an alternative pay scheme, monetize the value of that, put in place a defined contribution pay plan, and then say to new teachers, you can choose either one. The current pay plan with a defined benefit, or a new pay plan where you have a portable benefit, it won't be as rich a pension as a defined benefit, but that in the earlier years you can make more money, and just give people a choice. Let teachers decide which way they want to go. Let me conclude again. The most important issue we talk about is this human capital issue. The largest piece of your budget in every school district, in every nook and cranny of this country, is compensation for teachers. And I haven't heard a single individual defend the way we spend that massive amount of money on our most important input. We've got to talk about it. It makes people uncomfortable. Where I grew up in Brooklyn, in my community, nobody would say the word cancer. They thought if you said it out loud, something bad would happen. It's the same thing in these discussions about money. Somehow people think money is money grubbing, or you're greedy, or teachers don't care about money, or whatever. We all care about money for our budget. It's long past time we cared about money for how we spend our budget.
I just want to reinforce a couple of things that Joel said. And first of all, that when he's talking about the need to be able to compensate younger teachers at a higher level, just so it's clear to you all, there is very little value in experience over a career of a teacher. So you will typically find that there's a huge difference between a first and second year teacher, and some difference between a second and third, but teachers are about as effective as they're ever going to be. A really good teacher is really good by year 4 and 5, and a really bad teacher is permanently bad, generally speaking, by year 4 and 5. So the notion that there's this linear relationship and experience, that the 30-year veteran is worth three and a half times more than the 5-year teacher is totally erroneous. So we need to respect that. And, you know, he sort of alluded to the pay raises that teachers get. And we look at what a lot of districts do, and you'll see that, for example, we're doing a study in Seattle next week. We found that the teachers who are the 10 to 20-year veterans get twice or 3 times the pay raise that a younger teacher gets. So it's not even equitable in terms of the annual step increase that a teacher might get. So it's really important that we appreciate that. And when districts and states are struggling with how we're going to fund a different way of compensating teachers, if we stopped compensating teachers for advanced degrees, which, as Joel said, has no relationship to teacher effectiveness and student achievement, it's a total waste of money. If we stop doing that, you're freeing up millions of dollars in districts. So, for example, again, in Seattle, we found that they stopped paying for advanced coursework, they'd save $85 million a year. Here in PG County, $65 million. Depends on how much. So it's typically it's a lot of money, and it's enough to fund any sort of pay reform you want to put in.
And again, these are things that can be dictated by at the state level to say, you know, pension reform. A district can't tackle pension reform on its own. That has to be a state level activity because it affects all the districts. We could probably generate a good dialogue up here, but thought it'd be more helpful to open it up for questions for you all, to anybody who wanted to step up to the mic and ask questions.
Just a real quick question. Rich Crandall from Arizona. Have you seen a state or a district do exactly what you're just talking about with the advanced degrees?
No, but that's coming. Do you know about these deep dive districts? That Gates is ready to pour money into, I think it's 5 districts. They're going to get a lot of money, and all five of those districts have agreed to throw out the uniform salary schedule. So you're going to see some dramatically different things in those 5 districts. And also, you know, maybe Paul can lend us in on this one, but a lot of the states that are applying for Race to the Top money, they're agreeing to start throwing out these the advanced coursework. So that's coming. And certainly DC is trying, but they're in a little bit of hot water on other things at the moment. So, but that's what's going on there. Is that right? Is that your?
Yeah. I think you know, the issue is trying to convince local superintendents that they're of no value. and they're dealing with the unions who are trying to push hard on that to be compensated. But I do think that part of the requirements that you're going to see, well, part of the plans that you're going to see from states are going to be to try and do away with that.
Just, I don't want to hog the mic here, but economists have been saying this for years. I mean, it's about the firmest finding there is in teacher research literature, but apparently words are not enough. So my organization a few months ago decided to do a meta-analysis of the literature, and we painted a little pretty picture of just how ineffective these master's degrees are. And so you can get it off our website if you want, nctq.org, and it shows you a visual of what the literature has said, and there's not been one single study in 50 years that has found a significant effect from requiring teachers to have a master's degree.
So you want to ask your question? Let me just make a point, because when Kate says this is indisputable, right? Same thing with seniority. We pay endlessly for seniority, and we know we get no return for it. So the question, everybody's sitting there sort of saying, duh. And the question is, well, why isn't this enough? And let me give you the thing I have learned in the last 7 years as Chancellor. When I was a young lawyer, I used to represent the American Psychiatric Association, and during an era where there were a lot of light bulb jokes, my favorite light bulb joke is, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is only one, but the light bulb really has to want to change. Now wait. See, but the thing, this is what I mean by the elephant in the room. The thing is, look, the school system doesn't want to change. Right. That's why your leadership matters. So let's talk about advanced degrees. It's not just that unions want people to pay for advanced degrees. Make no mistake about it, so do ed schools. Ed schools like advanced degrees. You know why? They're uniquely in the business of granting them.
Right.
And where is their accountability? So first idea I had, I got Rod Page to give me $1 million. I put $1 million. I went to my state and I said, here's what I'm going to do. We train up, working with Ariela's group, we train up 1,600 teaching fellows each year. I got to buy them a degree to recruit them. They're telling me the degree is not worth very much to them. Why don't we take 1 out of 4, Paige and I, we will pay for this, and we will train up, randomly assign 1 out of 4, and then we'll do a multi-year longitudinal analysis of teacher value add and see whether our training people get different results, if not, what the costs are and everything. When I proposed, you'd have thought I had 3 heads. People look at me and say, oh no, how could you not send people to a university to get that training? So people come up to me at conferences like this all the time, and they say to me, well, I understand it. Everybody's saying the same thing, but how come it doesn't change? And the reason it doesn't change is because leaders at every level, leaders inside the system, leaders outside the school system, keep thinking studies and discussion is what this is about. But no, this is about the distribution of massive amounts of money and entrenched interests that legitimately want to protect their piece of the rock. I don't blame people. Hell, if I were a senior teacher, I want to make sure my pension funds are well funded because I'm just about to access those, and I think that's important. It's understandable. But if good people, informed people, caring people, leaders in politics don't step forward, then I promise you the system will not change no matter how many billion studies we do. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kelly Stargell from Florida, in the Florida House, and I ran the teacher quality bill for Florida last year. A lot of our things we're doing, we're starting from now going forward, not affecting current teachers. But as many of the other states, we're facing significant budget shortfalls. I suspect that we'll have some cuts in education, and the first to go are your first and second year teachers, third year teachers, because they're not tenured. So for one, I'd be petrified to go into the teaching profession at this time knowing we're looking at 4 and 5 years worth of cuts. Second part of that is when you eliminate teacher tenure going backwards, you've got the high-end teachers that are afraid of being released just because of their salary. Maybe they're making gains and maybe they're effective, but they're expensive. So how do you reconcile both of those and start something now that's going to help us in the future years dealing with keeping our good teachers, but yet still protecting some of the ones who are effective but expensive?
It's just a simple proposition. You have 2 variables, the amount you pay somebody all in and the results you get from that person's work. And what you want to do is develop pay systems that allow you and every other state to rationally allocate the resources, that's all. And if you do that, and you have senior teachers who are master teachers who are training other teachers and who are getting extraordinary results, you should and will pay them a lot more. It's exactly what I did in my law firm. And if you have young teachers who, as Kate says, show promise after 2 or 3 years, that you know that these are going to be long-term people, you invest heavily in them. Go to Cravath, Swain, and Moore. Every year they evaluate their associates, right? Top flight law firm in New York. They evaluate their associates. They know about 20% of their associates or somewhat after 7 or 8 or 9 years now are going to become partners. And what they're doing is investing in human capital all the time. And we should be doing the same thing. What Michelle said today makes perfect sense. Nobody should have to do layoffs by the last person hired. I have spent 7 years doing everything I can to hire better and better people. NBER did a research report saying that in my high poverty schools, the quality of teaching has gone up significantly, measured by any statistic, SAT scores, college grades, colleges they went to, anything. And now if I face layoffs, those are the first to go. And what compounded it is, if people had a portable pension, I could at least try buyouts to incentivize people to leave the system. But if you have a locked-in pension that requires you to do 30 years before you get anything significant, people are going to stay there. We've just got to think differently about it.
I think too that we hear this fear a lot about, well, what happens if people really do have control over their budgets and they say, boy, this teacher's really expensive, I'm going to let them go. First, I don't think we've ever seen that. I don't think that we've ever seen that wholesale. Maybe that's because we've never really tried it. But second is, if we make the information transparent and we identify who our good teachers are, then if you have a principal who is letting folks go, who are clearly they're very good teachers based on the fact that you're actually making that information available, you're going to have a superintendent and a chancellor who are going to ask a lot of questions of that principal. That's how accountability works. You have to let people have the chance to make those decisions. And the truth is, when it's very clear that student outcomes are what you're going for, that growth in student outcomes are what you're going for, what principal is going to think it's valuable to let that teacher go when they're a great teacher? They're so hard to find.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add the point that Michelle made today. What about the child going to that school? And you know, if you give, and we do this all the time, I mean, there's tons of professional development that are given to teachers. And there's some good strategies and there's some bad strategies. But at the end of the day, if you give people an opportunity and you measure their effect and their effect isn't getting it, then the fact that they're a senior teacher should not be an impediment to making a tough decision. Because at the end of the day, the person who's going to feel the brunt of the effect is the child in the classroom. And if we're serious about what we're doing, then we're going to have to put some of the feelings that we have for seniority, you know, behind us. But I do think that, you know, it can be done. It doesn't have to be done snap. You know, you give people an opportunity and you give them professional development and you give them a focus and a chance. But at the end of the day, you can't give them such a long chance and such a long lead time because, you know, it's the kids who are suffering, you know, and it's, in my state, it's over 200,000 kids who are below grade level. 200,000 kids is a lot of kids, you know. That's a tough thing.
Thank you all very much. Your music to my ears. But one of the questions you mentioned about master's degrees, it's mandated by the state that in 10 years you have a master's degree. So whether, and I was a former local school board member, and now I'm a legislator from Maryland. So my question is, a lot of this stuff is dictated to us. And as a local school board member, we'd like to make some of these changes. But it starts from the top. And then as a legislator, everybody says, stay away from us, we're the local school boards. And so don't tell us what to do. So I've been both places, and I still don't know how to affect the change that I think we need to do. How do we start? And how do we get the state school board to be that leader? Or you have your mayor, which is, I think your situation, Mr. Klein, is the best because you at least only have one person to go to, which is their mayor, to say, let's do this. But it's very difficult. How do we begin? Whether it's the state school board, the legislature, the local boards, it seems like there's a lot of conflict to trying to even move forward with any of these changes.
Well, let me take it from somebody who tried to take on the school boards this past legislative session, got his head crushed, okay? I think that, you know, I made a big mistake. I tried to take it on in too broad a brush and too broad a stroke. And I think that the way to approach this is perhaps to look at look at the schools that are your lowest achieving schools. And if you can accurately and reliably identify those schools, then hold the adults accountable for those. So what if we were to say that school boards who had a high concentration of low achieving schools would have to behave differently? Not every school board, because maybe those other school boards are doing well, but obviously we're not doing well with these schools. Now, we have districts, we have 69 school districts in the state of Louisiana. We have a number of districts. Every school, these are small districts, every school is a low-achieving school. So why shouldn't we take a different type of approach with regard to those? And then maybe by showing that a different type of approach with regard to school board rules, tenure rules, and master's degrees and step increases and all that kind of stuff, that all of those would be taken off the table. And if you do take those off the table, and then, like deep dive districts, you can prove over a period of 5 years that you can take a very poor rural district like we have in Louisiana, numerous districts, and we can take a totally different strategy and attract capital, because that's what happens when you do change this equation. Then you get people who are willing to come to very difficult circumstances. And then when you get different people to come, you can change the outcome. And that's, I think, the point of the deep dive districts. So my argument this time around is going to be to focus on those districts that have the lowest achieving schools in the highest concentrations and say the rules need to be different at least here. Now, I know they need to be different across the board, but don't try and eat the whole enchilada.
Okay, whatever you want to do, I'm there to help.
Well, I'm laughing because I'm on the Maryland State School Board, and we don't have a chance in hell of getting rid of that, just to be honest.
That's what I think.
It's just, I don't see the school board moving on it. I don't see there being any understanding in the state, and I doubt if Maryland is any exception. There's very little understanding of this issue. So it's really, we blasted Hartford, Connecticut. We were doing this study on them, and we said, why you spend all this money in master's degrees? And Randy Weingarten wrote an op-ed responding to our study saying, she's the president of the FT, and she said, I've never heard this before. There's no literature out there that says that master's degrees don't have an impact. So, the conversation, I can appreciate the need to move, but I don't think that this finding has made its way into the trenches. It could take a while. So I think that the best chance right now comes from the federal level with Race to the Top. I'm pretty certain that the Duncan administration, the Obama administration, Secretary Duncan, is going to be looking pretty carefully at applications that eliminate master's degrees incentives.
Well, thank you all very much.
So let me first, it's an interesting Freudian slip going back to my psychiatrist joke. But actually, two things that just happened are at least worth thinking about. I think Paul made the argument that you got to do this sort of in increments, and that's a very wise and thoughtful strategy. Some people would tell you it's very hard to jump the Grand Canyon in 2 jumps. And the question of whether incrementalism is an effective solution. I raise this because I think it's an important issue. I've done a lot of incremental changes, some of the pay plans I've talked about. And then Kate said one of the reasons we do things incrementally is because in the Maryland State Board, there's no chance in hell to get that done. There will be no chance in hell unless people in this room and the people you know are willing to get in the game. The reason I started, and Ellen's in the back, the Education Equality Project is I believe if we just go to meetings like this and it becomes an echo chamber, and we all agree with each other and we nod and we all go home and do the same old and say you can't change a damn thing in Maryland, you won't change a damn. One thing I know, nobody changes anything if you don't set out to change it. And everything that leadership is about is envisioning a future that isn't grounded in the past that's constraining, and then figuring out the ways to liberate the future from the past. That's what John Kennedy did when he put a man on the moon long after he died, in fact. And so when it comes to the work we're doing, we have got to mobilize. And let me give you the way to think about it. If tomorrow, in any city, I could mandate that every person was randomly assigned to the public schools in that city. In the next 3 to 5 years, the entire system would change dramatically. It wouldn't even be discussable. Right now, people of wealth, of power, etc., are able to opt out of this system through a myriad different ways. And therefore, the impact of the things we're talking about is not equitably distributed. If you equitably distribute it, there's no middle-class community I know that would let me say, I've got a great new math teacher, and you're going to fire her over some other math teacher who's not nearly so good. And it's our responsibility as leaders to start to say those things that people tell you can't be done, can be done, because if we don't think that, they aren't going to be done.
Well said. I'm John Wynn from Florida, and appreciate all of your very thoughtful comments and points of view. Just a question, would like your response to, really kind of a two-part question, but it has to do with the human dynamics of all this, because policy is intertwined with the human dynamics of actually, once you have the policy, you've got to make sure, you got to figure out how to get the people to really fulfill it as the vision was articulated. And the first one, Joel, in terms of our experience with providing bonuses to schools since the year 2000, and we basically let schools decide how to spend that money. And for 9 years in a row, the principals came up to the legislature and said, please legislate how we're supposed to spend this money, because they did not want to take the responsibility to make some tough decisions about even the broadest terms of how to spend the money. So the first question is, how do you get the leadership in the schools to make those kinds of hard decisions? And the second question, Paul, in terms of evaluating your new teachers, and as we're all sort of, and I believe it's inevitable that we're going to be evaluating teachers on student learning gains, which is very, very important. And when we worked on that in Florida related to a statewide performance pay issue, it was interesting when working with the superintendents regarding this issue, there was not the big debate about the policy itself, that our most effective teachers ought to be getting bonuses for their good work. But the biggest problem that they had was the thought of it becoming public in their school system, who the best teachers were, and of course who the worst teachers were. The basic question I got from the superintendents is, what are we supposed to do when all of our parents find out who our best teachers are? And of course, it seems silly but basically that requires the superintendents then to do something about their worst teachers. So, are your evaluations of your new teachers, do they find their way into the public arena in any way, and how do the school principals respond to that?
It's a very interesting question. Right now, the way that the model is set up, it's really accumulation of the average. So we're not identifying the teacher to the classroom. However, sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for. The superintendents and the teachers union have been pushing very hard for value added in our accountability system, because our accountability system is largely an absolute, growth model. And I'm relishing the thought of bringing value added in, because now we're getting ready to adopt it, and we're working on the model. We'll probably adopt it in a pilot form in 2010. But what's going to happen is we're going to have all this data, and we're pretty transparent about releasing this data, and I think people are going to be surprised to find at the end of the day. So we're kind of moving in a stealth mode here, and but it's going to become public, because there's no prohibition against it becoming public.
That's personnel data, isn't that? No, being personnel data, isn't that?
But this is going to be part of our accountability system, and it's really the effects on kids. So I guess you could argue that, but that's not really protected in our state.
I personally don't even see the advantage or the benefit of sharing this with parents. I mean, I don't think people in my office share each other's salary. I don't think teachers should be sharing their salaries with other teachers. I think there are some things that are confidential. But I do think principals ought to be asked to identify who their bottom 15% performers are in their building. No consequences at the moment. And who are their top 15%, just so they get in the habit of differentiating and getting at this thing that Ariella was talking, where everybody's the same. I mean, superintendents need to be looking at evaluations and saying, why is everybody in your building of equal talent? That's just not possible. And, addressing that. Good.
John, the answer on differentiated pay and all the principals, it seems to me there's only two answers. We all need to think very hard about the people we point as school leaders. The most important position in school reform is the person who leads the school, because the school is the unit in our business in which things happen. Nobody ever sent anybody to your offices in Tallahassee to get an education except when I came there and you helped educate me. But most people educate their children in schools, and school leadership is the undervalued piece because it's the weakest link in the political food chain in education. And so we've got to change that. And second of all, what you and others have done, Paul and others, but we've got to take it to an entirely new level, is to increase the accountability demands on our schools. And when you do, people will ultimately have no choice but to make those tough decisions. And it's painful, and all of this is difficult, but I think those are the only tools that I know that will change it.
Hi, Noelle Lambert-Alley from Texas. Mr. Pastorek, we've been interested in your recovery district. We've got a lot of different innovative things that we try to do in Texas, and one of the things that we've been watching is the recovery district in Louisiana. Can you talk about how you ensure what the process for, you're talking about your teachers, do you keep a lot of teachers when you bring those schools into the recovery district? How does that work? And are there lessons learned you can share with us?
Well, we have some really wonderful freedom in the recovery school district. Basically, it says when a school is performing so low for so long that the state may place it into what's called the recovery school district. In the recovery school district, we can either charter the school or we can treat it as a traditional school. So we have schools now in New Orleans, in Baton Rouge, and Shreveport that are all in the recovery school district. About half of them are charter, about half of them are traditional schools. When a school comes in the recovery school district, any collective bargaining agreement that may exist does not apply to the to the recovery school district. So that collective bargaining will still apply in the district, but it doesn't apply, and the effects of it doesn't apply on the district. And then within the district, we don't have we still have tenure, but not for the first 3 years. So in effect, they have to go through a new tenure process. Now, a lot of people thought that this would rebuff people and they wouldn't be interested in coming to teach in the system, but actually we've got more people applying to be in the recovery school district schools than in any other district in the state. So I would simply say that the kinds of things that New Teacher Project have espoused and the observations made in the widget effect document and the proposals and recommendations are proposals that we're using in our district, the traditional run schools that are led by principals. We've adopted a philosophy quite similar to New York, where the principals really make the decisions on hiring and firing of all personnel. Now, we moved them into that gradually over the last 2 years, but this year, for example, all teachers are hired, retained, dismissed by the principal in the building, and we have the flexibility to do it. Now, as tenure starts to kick in, that will be impacted, but it's been quite interesting. And interestingly, you know, in the first 2 years, we had a lot of retention of more senior teachers, but and a lot of resistance to bringing in young new teachers. But now that principals are accountable for the outcomes in the building, that's begun to change. But still, senior teachers, by the way, are being kept where they are effective. So I could speak a lot more about that, but I would just say that it's a zone where there is the freedom to do all of these things. So I'll leave it at that. I know we're getting close to the end.
I will add to you that I think one of the things that's so attractive about the Recovery School District idea is that not only is it attractive from that perspective, but as a zone that allows you much more freedom, it does attract a lot of the education reform organizations that say, you know, if we can pilot something or try something new, this is the place to try it because there is so much freedom. I think, do we have time for one more question, or are we out of time? We're out of time. Can we take one more?
I'll just speak loud. How are you doing teacher effectiveness at the secondary level for teachers who are not teaching your core subjects that you don't measure by testing? And how are you determining how to do merit pay, non-merit pay for those teachers?
That's a quick answer.
Well, the simple answer is we don't have a formal process for evaluating that. It's left up to the districts and left up to the principals. That's something that we're working on actually for value added. In order to look at that, we're going to have some other tools and other evaluation processes, but that's under consideration, but we don't have anything in place right now.
If you take a look at what Michelle Reed did on impact, where she addressed those issues, in addition to principal evaluations, she's also looking at master teacher evaluations of teachers in non-test subject matter to get basically two opinions, and then she'll start to cross-correlate those.
But, you know, what states and districts can do is to assemble teachers by grade level and subject matter in a working group over the summer and have them decide what are the metrics we're going to use to decide if we're being effective. And everybody has to use the same measures that's in 9th grade standard English. You know, you decide very specific metrics. That's not with value added, but that's at least some objective standard that all teachers have to meet who are teaching that particular subject. If you try to do it outside the subject level or grade level, you have problems.
Okay, I think we're out of time here, so thank you all for your very good questions. We appreciate it.
Very exciting.
University, is it? You know?